This podcast contains potentially sensitive topics and strong language. Listener discretion is advised.
Trauma is, it's a Greek word that means wound. Really, it's how were we wounded and how did we respond to those wounds that we received. I was one of those people who would look at people in the street and say, what the hell's wrong with you? I had a shitty childhood and I'm here scraping along, so, get your shit together. That hardness of heart comes from a place of lack of compassion for oneself. I think if we really scrape the surface of somebody that's not compassionate to someone else's pain, we'll find they're probably not compassionate to themselves.
When I was a kid growing up, nobody talked about mental illness, at least openly, that is. There were the hushed talks about so-and-so's mom losing it and having to be committed to a psych ward, being taken away and put in a hospital somewhere. Or a friend's uncle who went off the deep end, now getting help with his breakdown, whatever that meant. As a kid, it was always a mystery. Back then, if you or someone in your family was getting mental health help of any kind, nobody talked about it. It was purposefully kept quiet in a tight circle of family and close friends. There was a big stigma around saying you needed help. Today, thankfully, that is changing. Not only are there an increasing number of people seeking various forms of mental health help, just the idea of it is becoming comfortable and accepted. People are more open. They want to share and talk about what's going on in their life. It's commonplace to hear someone say, "Hey, I gotta run. I've got to get to my therapy session." It does feel like we're living through a time where the stigma around mental illness is being dismantled. However, there is still a big hurdle in front of us. For those suffering with mental health issues, the available help is severely lacking. This is particularly, and I'll say also painfully true, for those struggling through homelessness. In a culture where we're still learning to understand and give bandwidth to those suffering on our streets, an added level of judgment is created when the housed community sees folks living outside, navigating their mental health condition, with their life on full display, unable to be hidden behind a closed door. The negative stereotype, which is centered on misunderstanding, is fueled by the visible symptoms of mental illness. If we discuss the issue of trauma, just one piece of the larger mental health spectrum, we know that the vast majority of folks living chronically homeless have been traumatized. Either trauma brought them into homelessness, or living homelessness itself has brought trauma to them. That should alarm us. We're hoping that this episode will be part of an increasing awareness of bringing mental health help to those struggling through homelessness. We also hope that this conversation will provide useful and informative material for those looking to find ways to be in relationship with those living outside. Today, I'm very excited to welcome my dear friend Rebecca Demerol to this conversation. She wears many hats in her life, which I will add she does beautifully, bringing lived and studied expertise to the conversation. I'm going to let her tell you about all of that, about who she is. But first, I do want to share that I just finished her excellent book titled Nothing's for Nothing: Transformation Through Trauma. It is a collection of personal essays and reflections that I found to be profoundly insightful. I'm guessing you will too. You can find a link to her book on our website. And with that, let's jump in and meet Rebecca.
I'm actually really excited to talk to you.
You always say that.
No, I don't always say that. Well, I am always excited, you're right. But I'm specifically very excited because I have this very high level of respect for you and the work that you do, and just you as a human means a lot to me to be able to have this conversation. So let's see where it goes.
Oh, well, likewise.
So I think maybe let's start by first, can you just introduce yourself? Because I know you do a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And can you maybe just give a quick overview of who you are?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with what I do. So I'm an acupuncturist and clinical counselor, and I've been doing the clinical counselor work for over 20 years and acupuncture and Chinese medicine for the last 15, 16 years. I think both working as a healer, professional, healer in that regard in Chinese medicine and the counseling, both those things are informed by the trauma that I went through as a kid. And that seems like a funny thing to say, but I think my healing journey kind of led me to a place where I felt on solid enough ground and had gained enough insights that I wanted to share those with other people. As I work with people all these years, I find that there's so much that I see in other people's journeys and struggles that I've either been through myself or I'm still going through and healing. And so it's kind of like vicariously I continue healing through helping other people. So yeah.
That was going to be my question, which seems obvious, right? But that
Yeah.
you're actually, so often in life, we actually grow more when we're actually teaching or helping others. And I'm guessing that's true for your journey with regards to healing.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. And the people that come to me, it always just feels like a gift, like, oh, now this is being asked of me. Now I have to draw deeper into myself to find ways to help that person. And I always feel that I'm on this parallel journey with people. And it's
beautiful.
It really is, and it really helps me just continue to learn and grow.
It's the proverbial win-win, right? Like you're helping people and you're also helping yourself in the process.
And I'll share that with people too. Like if I'm working with, I mean, if somebody's coming to you, in a counseling kind of capacity, you don't want to be disclosing a bunch about yourself. But if I'm touched by something that somebody's telling me, or I can see their pain, I'll cry with them, because that's just being a human. And in there's healing too, to feel like, there's that
being
empathy.
vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about, like, what do I want to talk with Rebecca about? And when I think about the issue of homelessness and the disconnect that happens between the unhoused and the housed, and my own feelings of, the closer you come, the more you feel. The more you feel, the more you act. That really the trick is to somehow get us to come closer, but that requires the ability to do so, right? Like you can't just push two people together. And I wonder, like, if we could have a conversation about if someone says, that's living inside, for example, I really want to get involved. I really want to reach out and try to make a difference and be with those that are suffering through homelessness. What do they need to know? And so maybe we could talk a little bit about what do we need to know about the unhoused that are going through their own trauma? And then also on the other side, maybe the second half of the conversation can be about what does that journey look like for helping others that are going through trauma? And what if they have their own trauma? What should they be doing?
Well, that part of my history is growing up in a pretty traumatic, chaotic, violent household, and leaving home when I was 13 and living on the streets and in and out of foster care, and very sort of precarious lifestyle for all of my teen years and even into my 20s, very unstably housed. And so that also, informs the work that I do and what I care about. And folks that are housed, that are wanting, that are seeing, first of all, noticing and choosing to notice the suffering of folks that don't have a place to live and don't have clean clothes and don't have a bathroom and don't have any privacy and all of those things. And the suffering that we witness through people just trying to get through those times and using drugs and having engaging in dangerous behaviors and risk taking. If somebody notices that and chooses to allow themselves to feel like, oh yeah, this touches my heart, and I might want to do something about it, I think right there is an amazing leap of faith, because so many times folks on the street are used to just feeling invisible. And I remember that feeling too, of just feeling invisible, and people walk by you and they don't want to see the suffering. They don't want to feel whatever that brings up for them.
Yeah.
And so, the first step.
I want to stop and say thank you for actually backing up before that point that I kind of started, because you're absolutely right. Just getting to that place is a beautiful and amazing thing, right? For a human being to just open themselves to that. So, that's worth celebrating.
Yeah, something's got to chip off the old, covering around the heart to be able to say, oh yeah, I see that. I see you. You're a human being, and there's different layers of letting it in. So, and then I think it's really important to check in with oneself about, and how do I feel? How do I feel being that close to somebody who I see with that degree of suffering? Would I feel more safe if I were in a certain kind of environment, well-lit street in the daytime versus at night, versus with a woman versus with a man? Are they sitting? Are they standing? What position am I in? All of that, I think, is really good to take into consideration, so that you're not stepping so far outside of your comfort zone that you feel unsafe. And then, like you always say, just engaging in some way, whether it's eye contact or saying hello, and just, is there anything that I could do for you? Is there anything that you need? And I think it's a really nice thing to engage, for a house person to engage with another group that may be able to give them more information and support and resources to engage in ways that are helpful.
Yeah, to keep assuring that feeling of safety.
Yeah.
Because I think we all operate better when we feel safe, like we're in our zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there may be lots of good reasons for people to, keep their distance, and because they don't feel safe. And it could be all in their head, but it could be old memories, it could be all kinds of stuff. So, just respecting how you feel and how you feel in that moment, and then just seeing if you can get the heart to be engaged with the mind. It's like lately people are talking about being dysregulated versus being regulated. And dysregulated, like we see somebody on the street and they're yelling and screaming and their pants are half down and they seem to be, on drugs and everything. Well, that's an extreme state of dysregulation, because the person doesn't know how to control anything. And if we think of, regulation, it's when we have a sense of things being in alignment, and that head, heart, and gut all being able to sort of operate together. That there's a yes, yes, and yes in my head, heart, and gut, and I know how I feel, and so I can engage in a way that feels authentic and also safe.
Can you talk a little bit about what trauma does to people? I mean, we're talking about trauma in lots of ways these days, right? If you're listening for it, it's everywhere.
Right.
But I think one of the things that happens for people that are housed and living in maybe much more structured lives, as opposed to the unstructure of living on the street,
Right.
see something unfold, and they immediately make judgments and pull back, and all the fears of the negative stereotype rush in. But that's a human being that's actually having their life unfold right out there in public, and a lot of stuff's going on often because of trauma.
Yeah.
Can you give some insights into the types of things that person, the barriers and the struggles that person is probably experiencing or can be experiencing?
Yeah, and that's, so interesting that they're going through all that right out in the open, whereas we can go through all that, but we're inside our house, so it's not like we're just exposed to the world that they can judge us and say, oh God, what's Rebecca doing? She's really seems to be dysregulated, right? Yeah, so...
What a privilege that is. for all of
Exactly.
us.
Yeah, and then when somebody's out in the open, you see everything just hanging out there. Like you say, they can be judged, and they may very well be a sick person, definitely a dysregulated person, but not a bad person. Because I don't actually believe that there's anything as a bad person.
Yeah.
I just don't. I believe that everybody has worth, and nobody and nothing is beyond redemption. That's a core belief of mine. And trauma is it's a Greek word that means wound, and so really it's how were we wounded, and how did we respond to those wounds that we received. And when we think of trauma, I think these days people think, well, were they sexually abused as a child, and were they beaten, all these kinds of things. It's not necessarily those things that always wound us deeply. It could just be that a parent didn't pay attention to us in the way that we really needed as sensitive children. And so those wounds come from not just what happened, but it's how we responded to, how we adapted to the pain.
And we all have different abilities.
All have different abilities, and all have different sensitivities too. And so what we're seeing when we're seeing hurt people is people that are have deep wounds that haven't been soothed,
Yeah.
and that have maybe lost the ability or never had it modeled to them how to soothe themselves. And so they look, I have looked for soothing in other ways, drugs and relationships, and whatever it took to sort of make me feel soothed.
Yeah. I've heard this a number of times, and I'd be curious to hear your response, is that somebody that is out on the street engaging in some activity, and a person might look at them and say, why don't they just get a job, or why don't they just get their shit together, or pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, that type of conversation. And if I say something like, well, we don't know what happened to that person, right? And maybe they were physically abused. And I've gotten this response so many times that says, well, I was physically abused and I pulled myself up. And how do you respond to that?
Well, I'll start by saying that I was one of those people who would look at people in the street and say, what the hell's wrong with you? I had a shitty childhood, and I'm here scraping along, so, get your shit together. That hardness of heart comes from a place of lack of compassion for oneself. Mm-hmm. I think if we really scrape the surface of somebody that's not compassionate to someone else's pain, we'll find they're probably not compassionate to themselves. So when I started learning how to be loving to myself and sensitive to myself, I was much more able to be that way for other people. Going back to that direct connection with the person that's saying that, and kind of trying to uncover that belief and that hardness is maybe the way to go.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That actually really moved me forward just now. I think that's a beautiful insight, and it's a window into all of our lives, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if we're behaving in a certain way because someone's irritating us, maybe the first direction that we should look at is in our own direction, and like, why is this upsetting me, or why am I reacting this way, and what is it about myself? One of the things that we used to say at Facing Homelessness all the time was addressing homelessness has more to do with yourself than the homeless.
Oh, yeah.
And it feels like what you just said speaks into that pretty clearly.
It's the spiritual part that's kind of missing, that self-inquiry, that looking back into what is it about me that's bothered by you,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. And why?
And where did that come from? And then when we start to kind of, and it's always like a big ball, a big knot inside it, so we just have to tease the threads apart a little bit and start to untangle that that ball
Yeah.
of that knot, and then we start to see, oh yeah, then we follow that thread back. Oh, that's where that came
Yeah.
from. That's where that belief came from.
With that understanding, it feels difficult in those moments, those situational moments when somebody says, why don't they pick themselves up? And then you're the one hearing that. You can't in that moment say, well, that's because you don't love yourself.
Right.
It's such a nuanced, tender moment, and maybe one that can't be resolved in that moment.
Right. Our hardened stance doesn't help the situation.
Yeah.
It's like I teach de-escalation and conflict resolution, and to resolve a potential escalated situation or a conflict situation, it only takes one person to de-escalate something. So both sides don't have to de-escalate; just one side de-escalates.
I'll share, I had a similar experience running the Facebook page, is when somebody would make a terrible comment, if that comment was met with an equally aggressive comment back, it would just up it. And it was almost like hate needs hate to keep moving forward.
Yeah.
And if you meet it with something closer to love, that they might say one more time something bad, but if it's met one more time with love or kindness or understanding, it's amazing how that, you're absolutely right, how it dissipates.
Yeah.
What happens when someone's in the moment of their trauma? I think their window gets smaller, right? But can you share a little bit for those listening that might not have those experiences? What's going on when someone's in the moment of not feeling safe?
When we don't feel safe, it's usually because we're locked in a time other than the present moment. Even if the present moment, something actually unsafe is happening, we just have to be sensitive. And I think most of the time it's just giving space and giving privacy to somebody if they're having a really hard time.
Yeah.
And then sometimes body language can tell us a lot too. Just if somebody looks like their head is down and they're cowering, and I walk by them and they look up at me, I'm going to look at them too and say, "You okay?" But if their body language is all spiky and looks like they don't want anybody to be anywhere close to them, then I'll just kind of send them love from my heart as I'm walking by.
Yeah.
And yeah.
One of the things I think is difficult for all of us is when someone's having an episode or really struggling, it's easier to look and say, okay, that person's struggling. I'm gonna act in this beautiful, compassionate way. I find it much more difficult when someone's appearing to be completely normal. Maybe they're not even homeless. Maybe they're in a home, right? But they've got their own thing going on, and then they say something that upsets us. We expect each other to be fully healthy, normal people, but that's not the case, right? Navigating the complexity of people that are outside, or even people in your life that are inside, it's hunting back to the overarching discussion of trauma.
Yeah.
Like we're not just either traumatized or not traumatized. We're some spectrum of.
Yeah, well, and we need to take care of ourselves like all day long. I do these trauma trainings and self-care, trainings for social service agencies and all different places. And, people say, well, I'm burnt out in my job and I, just can't stand it anymore. And I come home and I yell at my husband and kick the cat, and I don't want to, I just want to sit in front of the TV with some ice cream and, like that. And it's because throughout the day, all through our lives, we need to have that self-awareness and self-inquiry and keep breathing, keep taking care of ourselves so that we're able to respond in healthy, engaged ways rather than coming from the fight or flight. As soon as I'm triggered, I feel like I want to attack you or run from you. Yeah. Or what they call the dorsal vagal response, which is just to kind of cower and hide, under a blanket with a Haagen-Dazs in front of the TV. Our home base, we would hope we would grow into, is more of what is called the ventral vagal response when I'm talking about polyvagal theory here. And that's the ability to connect with one another in real time and that takes some work. We don't have a lot of good modeling of that from our political figures or anywhere in the media. We really don't have a lot of modeling of authenticity and good self-care. And so we need to cultivate that so that we're able to respond to one another in compassionate, just real and authentic ways.
Yeah. What I love about what you just said is we tend to think about the moment as where the work has to be done. Like I've got to, like something happens and then I say to myself, I need to be compassionate, or I need to respond beautifully, or I need to respond lovingly. But what you're telling me is that actually we need to be doing the work all the time, so that we can create the bandwidth for when those moments show up.
Yeah.
That we're flexible and stretched enough because we've been practiced with it.
Yeah, just practicing it all the time. Yeah. Rather than, go into this burnout phase of work, and then so I need a vacation, or I better do a self-care workshop, or I don't have time for meditation, or, I squeezed in some yoga, on my lunch break and stuff. It's like we need more than that. Yeah. Society is squeezing us to a point where we've forgotten how to care for ourselves, and forgotten how to engage with one another, and forgotten how to make there be enough housing and support for people that can't afford it.
Even just basic needs.
Just basic needs, Yeah, what a crazy world. And so it comes back to that spiritual aspect of caring for ourselves is how we care for one another.
I think there are things too, Rebecca, that are not really part of the conversation in homelessness that I hear, right? Like you probably do because you're in the middle of it, but the general conversation is still, when we talk about homelessness, we talk about those people over there.
Yeah.
And we talk about like how are we going to do a number of things either to them or for them, like how are we going to fix them, how are we going to house them, how are we going to get them off drugs? But the conversation typically doesn't involve, and what is my part in all that, or how am I contributing, or how can my life actually move forward in a way that would be better for society. I think we're missing that mark. And when it even is about what is my part, we tend to just ask, what can I do for them again? As opposed to what can I do for me? Like how can I create that bandwidth that you were just talking about, so that I am a more beautiful human being to be in service to people.
And we need both those things, right? We need how can I help, and what's going on in me as I consider that, and what is the special way that I can give, and what changes in me as I give, and what changes in me even as I consider to give and to open my heart more. So all of that is where we become altered, and then that alters the relationship, and that alters the relationships around us, and it just changes everything.
It does. And also, I think you talked about this earlier when we weren't recording, but talking about modeling, like how important that is, like modeling good behavior. And people see the things that you're doing in life, and that affects them. I know it affects me, right? So I think that's a powerful thing about this equation of how do we address homelessness is we try to healthfully model what that looks like. Yeah.
And it's not always easy, and it's not always, and it's not a linear process either. I have my ups and downs. I have my times where I get really triggered by being around a, certain individual at a certain time. It reminds me of things that have happened to me and on the street and in my youth, and so then that tells me I need to look deeper inside and process that stuff, and that's the gift.
Yep.
Actually, it's
that's
the gift.
That's shining the light on it.
Yeah, and that's also the hard part too.
Yeah.
So the diamond doesn't get to be a diamond without some pressure, as they say, right? So.
How about you wrote a book? How about tell me about it?
I did. Yeah. So it's called Nothing's for Nothing: Transformation Through Trauma. And it is a memoir, and it's just about everything that's happened to me thus far in life. little anecdotal stories. There's kind of 3 sections to it, and just looking at kind of childhood and midlife, and then later on. I dedicated it to my mom, who left when I was 3 years old, and I didn't see again till I was 12 years old. So big part of my childhood, she was gone from my life. We had a really difficult relationship, and did a lot of healing at the end. She passed away about 10 years ago now. And
Healing that came out of the two of you talking for 3 years.
Yeah. Mom had a stroke when she was 85, and we still had this really, terrible relationship. A lot of resentment from especially me, but as a kid, I was homeless for all my teen years, and Mom was living in Vancouver, where I grew up too, and at one point my social worker was like, "Can't you go live with your mom? We had you in foster care and on the streets and everything, like, can you?" So we tried that, but Mom, I cramped her style. And so I was 15 at the time, and after about 6 weeks she kicked me back out again. So I was it was pretty perilous there on the streets, and I had a lot of really, really tough and dangerous times. And so later on in life, when I got on my feet and was working as a paramedic for BC Ambulance, I had a lot of resentment towards Mom, and at the end, having gone through a lot of work myself, and brought Mom to Victoria, where I was living, and had her in an extended care facility. She'd had a stroke and was paralyzed on half her body, and she was being really cruel to me, and I was just kind of visiting her daily and having her be really abusive to me. She was very angry, and there was a lot of pain. I could see the pain, but I also had a lot of pain, anger myself, and we just kind of finished up by letting all that go. Yeah, I won't spoil it, because you got to hear the story in the book, and I make you read the book.
But basically you hung in there.
I hung in there with her, and we found a way to get through it all. And it's probably the most profound thing that's ever happened to me in my life, is to only carry love for her. And it's nothing to do with my thinking, all my beliefs that I had about how she ruined my life and didn't love me, and never did love me. All that just disappeared. I have no explanation for it except that it's grace. It was pure grace, and I just have nothing but love for her.
I'm really happy for you. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Because I'm almost done with the book, but yeah, there's a lot of shit.
Well, it's a burden to carry resentment. It's a burden to carry a grudge.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You think you're hurting the other person, but you're hurting yourself.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. So there's that. And the book is full of all my hard-won insights, all my Chinese medicine kind of perspectives. I've thrown that into. I was blessed to have done some work with Dr. Gabor Mate. He wrote the foreword for it. So just put a little plug in there for that. And he's become a good friend and a mentor, and I certainly he's really helped me a lot too.
Yeah, part of the journey.
Part of the journey.
Why did you write the book?
I just started writing a blog, actually, and I told myself I'm going to sit down and write a blog post every day for a year. So I just did that. And I said to Gabor's the one who I said to him, I said, I got this blog post. I got 80,000 words or something. And he goes, "That's a book." And when I heard that, I was like, bing, bing. Exactly, bing. And I was like, yeah, okay. Yeah. And so I just started piecing it together and made it in a roughly it was not in any kind of chronological order. It was just these stories, just these memories, little snapshots that came up, and I just kind of blurt them out on the page, and yeah.
What I found is that they, because of your genuine honesty and vulnerability in sharing, I feel like it allows the reader to kind of honestly think about their own life and access it. And I think it's because of how open you are in the way you share.
Thank you. That's the whole idea. But yeah, thank you.
I think it's very beautiful in that way. There's one scene that I paused at for quite a while, and that was, and it's because of what you said earlier about bandwidth, but also it ties bandwidth for being ready for situations, which creates awareness in yourself about how to move forward. And so often, because it's a difficult road to navigate with, jumping into the arena or the pool of homelessness and trying to be there with people in whatever fashion you want, that so often you're just missing it, and you're you can even create unintended consequences, and you have to kind of be okay with that and be able to move through it. And that scene where you convince your mom to bring the television to your brother, and then it just did not work as you had imagined. And I think it's an important piece to share, because that's also the truth of trying to be helpful, is that mistakes come along with it. Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean...
Yeah, that story, my brother Michael, I can say his real name, Robert, because actually Robert passed away, and I didn't want to use his real name when he was still alive, but he passed away last year. And I was living in Vancouver. I bumped into him on the street and discovered he was living just a couple blocks away from me. And, he was 4 years older. We'd grown up in this terrible, violent household where he was sexually abused. And I, to my memory, was not sexually abused, but my brother would take out his anger on me. So I was beaten daily by him. He'd just sit on my chest and punch me in the face. And lots of violence there. And so when I found out he was just living close by, I was just like, I was scared in a way, but I also knew that he and Mom were trying to reconcile some sort of relationship, because he was about 6 when Mom left, and I was younger. I was 3, and for him, it was his mommy. I mean, that was being torn away like that. I think was even more traumatic for him than it was for me. And I don't know why I'm saying mummy instead of mum, but anyways, I said to Mom, well, Robert lives just like a few blocks away from me. And I was talking to him and asking him about, what are you watching on TV? And he doesn't have a TV. And I said, Mom, you were saying that you had this TV you wanted to get rid of. Why don't you just give Robert the TV? And she's like, oh, I don't know about that. And I was like, no, I convinced her this is the thing to do. And Mom didn't have a car, so I said, okay, just put it in the taxi and just, get over there, and then I'll meet you there. And so she in her gut didn't want to...
and they hadn't talked.
For
a long time.
Yeah, so there was this, this sort of reconciliation. It was kind of, I think they might have talked on the phone, but, really there wasn't, any big reconciliation with the two of them. And so anyways, I had convinced Mom, get the damn TV out of the car and we'll struggle it up the walk and we'll knock on the door. And, and my brother answers. And this is a man that's been through hell, right? Now he's in his early 30s. He's extremely private and doesn't like contact and has been invaded his whole life. And so here we are at his door. Here's your mom and here's your TV. And he's just standing there with his mouth hanging open. And I'm like, here's the TV. Here's your mom. Like, I fixed everything, didn't I? Say thank you. And basically he just slams the door. And poor Mom, I mean, it still makes me cry. Poor Mom, it was hard enough to go against her own gut instincts and to go there in the first place, and to know that she had hurt him once again, and I was crushed too, because what I really wanted was for them to just love each other, and I tried to force something that didn't work. Yeah. And and then the next morning there's the TV out on the walk. I walk by and there's a sign on it, take it, and
free, take it away.
Yeah, exactly. And to Mom's credit, she didn't give up on him. she kept trying to have a relationship with him, and I think that that was the best that it could be. So a lesson. I learned a big lesson there about forcing something and trying to impose my will upon a situation in a way that wasn't sensitive to the situation or the people.
Yeah. Check in with yourself about, does this feel right?
Yeah.
And is this what they're actually wanting, or is this something I need?
Right, because I knew in my guts that it wasn't right the whole time, but I at that point in my life, and I still see this sometimes, that I override my own gut instincts, because that's what you have to do when you're a kid in a traumatic situation. When abuse is happening, you have to find a way of almost rising above it by, this isn't happening right now, so I'm going to ignore my gut instincts that my father is doing that or my brother is doing that. This can't be happening. So it's a pattern of ignoring one's gut instincts.
I've never understood that, because what we're always taught is listen to your heart, listen to your body, and
Right.
And that's interesting to hear that trauma can move you out of that and into your head to find the rationalization or the explanation, but you're actually disconnecting from that very important centering.
And that is basically what PTSD is. It's a normal response to an abnormal situation. So we just kind of remove ourselves from it. But when that becomes habitual, when it becomes something that we don't have a choice over, then we don't know how to respond properly in the situation when we really need to.
Yeah. So you had to learn to trust your gut again.
Yeah.
And is that the work of healing?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, to know the difference between what feels like yes and what feels like no, and then to trust those things.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not yes or no. Sometimes it's maybe or it's I don't know, and
part
that's
yes
okay
and part
too.
No.
Yeah, and so it's like, I need more time. I need more information. I need more checking in with myself in order to have some more clarity in this situation.
There's a couple things here I want to just read. A couple little quotes that I wrote down, and I'd maybe you wouldn't have any more to say about it than just what I'm reading, and that's good too. But if you have more to share on it, I think they struck me as being very important things, simple but important. The first one is on page 62. You write, we always remember how someone makes us feel, and I really find that so important. Because, one is I find it to be true. That's how even in my brain of my Rolodex of people, it's almost the first thing that I identify with is, how did they make me feel? How do I feel when I'm with them? And can you talk a little bit about that? Why is that important for you? Why did you write that?
I smile when I think of this memory, even though it's kind of a painful memory, and that quote that you just read came from the story where my dad is painting the front porch, and I step out into the front porch and slide into the paint and just go down the stairs. The paint can tips over, just makes a big mess, and I'm covered in paint. And I'm just a little kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old. And I'm figuring, because my dad's got this temper, my dad, often would explode about things. And in this case, I'm scared, I've made a mess and I wrecked everything. And so I'm crying already. And my dad just, really gently brings me into the kitchen and get some paint thinner or paint remover, whatever, out of the cupboard, and just starts taking it off my leg, and he's not mad, and I'm kind of amazed that he's not mad, and he's just being gentle with me, somehow just really compassionate and gentle, and it's a memory that I have that makes me love him in spite of all of the other stuff, because it kind of, that love cut through a lot of the hard stuff.
Yeah.
And I wonder, in retrospect, and I reflect on this in the book, where did he learn that gentleness? Where did that gentleness come from? Was it just inspired by the fact that he had a scared little girl who was his daughter in front of him? And just the beauty of that moment stuck to me.
You know what? When you share it that way, it makes me think about an earlier conversation that we had around not seeing people for just the one thing that affected you, to know that they have many other sides. So here's a father that clearly sexually abusing your brother, and having other components in his life that dramatically affected you, but yet you were still, in retrospect now, looking at all of that and saying, but he also had some beautiful sides to him, and that to remember that we all are made up of parts and pieces of good and bad.
Yes. Well, and it's not whitewashing, and it's not canonizing somebody for all the good that they do, and so you're forgetting all the bad. It's just widening the window. It's just broadening the view and seeing this person, my dad, as somebody who held multitudes within him.
Yeah.
And just like we all do,
like every one of us.
Every one of us.
And then I would think that you would say this, that and then it's up to us to which of those that we are, letting impact us, or maybe I'm not saying that correctly. If we're open to all of it, then we get to choose which of those we're actually bringing close to us. Yeah. Is that?
Yeah. Or do we broaden our capacity to just take it all in? And I think that's the true challenge of humanity, is to, for every person to take in every person, and every nation to take in every nation, and et cetera, et cetera. And we're all so compartmentalized, and so narrow in what we'll accept of one another. That's our real challenge in humanity, is to broaden our ability. Yeah.
Yeah. If only.
We're working on it.
We're working on it. Okay, another quick one. You wrote, and this is page 122, I can also go to it if you want me to jog the memory, but when we experience trauma, it often changes us because we are laid bare down to the things that matter most. And that for me speaks into these times when, I'll start to talk about so much beauty that I see in people that are outside. And when I do it, I have to be quick to say I don't want to romanticize it. Like it's like something you wouldn't wish on anybody, but because of it, this other beautiful thing happened. And do you feel that way about, first of all, is that, what are you saying here, and how do you feel about that comment that these tragic things that do happen to us also end up birthing unbelievably beautiful things in people?
Yeah, well, I think just stepping back to what you said, that, you don't want to romanticize, but you do see the beauty because that's the eyes that you're looking through, right? I mean, that's just part of Rex. That's just part of how you are. And, kind of the deep stability of yourself allows you to see more of that. You're looking through that lens anyways, more often, I think, than many people might be looking through a much harsher lens. And I know for me that, and I think this is true of everybody, that we see that when somebody is struggling and the struggle really strips something away from us, then we're left with whoever we are is the most sort of basic, authentic part of us. And that's kind of what I have felt over the years, is that nothing can really hurt me because I've already felt that, and already have just gotten down to a real basic place
Yeah. Has it reduced fear in your life because of it?
Yeah. Yes. And I think I go through phases of getting triggered too.
Yeah.
And
Get brought back into it.
being brought back into it. And I think it's just the proverbial onion, of just the layers of healing. And partly how I gauge my own healing is noticing, back to the analogy of the wound, that it doesn't hurt as much. It doesn't hurt as often. It is not hurt as easily. And whatever scar has formed over it is starting to dissipate, so that it's becoming more homogeneous with the rest of me. So it becomes integrated. Yeah. There's that word, integrated.
Yeah. So it's not like one day it's all gone,
right.
But you're learning to live with it and to actually incorporate or integrate.
Yeah, and the healing, of course, is not an event. It's a process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like everything.
Like everything is, right.
Okay, here's another one.
Okay.
Seeing someone without projecting what we believe about them is a learned skill. And then you also, just a little bit after, wrote, the pain or isolation of not being seen.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of both sides of that, right? Like what we do to people by projecting our own belief of who they are, and then the result of actually that projection is keeping them from seeing what their feeling is, your projection, but not actually being seen.
Well, and that's the beauty of just say hello, right? Isn't it? Just for a moment, giving your time and attention, those are our precious commodities in life, our time and attention, and giving time and attention to somebody who has felt invisible can just bring some light into that dark, that dark cavern of belief that I don't matter and that nobody's ever going to help me. And that's what cynicism is. Cynicism is crushed hope. So we become cynical that, it's never going to get better. Yeah. Like nothing ever works anyways, Why should I believe that? I mean, that's basically what's happening in America right now, is there's this intense cynicism. We see it in our political figures, right? And so, just one moment to let some of that cynicism dissipate for somebody by engaging in a real, authentic way and giving time and attention.
Yeah, I am visible. Somebody actually saw me.
Yeah. And enough moments like that happen, I think it does make a difference.
Yeah. Like, what do you think the biggest growth for you was in writing this book? And I know writing is a huge entry point into healing. I mean, writing is really cathartic and telling. But what do you have a takeaway from writing this book when it was all said and done, and you reflect on it? Like, what was the growth that came out of it for you?
I think it was giving myself the time and attention to really look at my life and to look at my experiences and to stand back and have that perspective. I felt I felt like I'd really nurtured myself. And sometimes it was hard. Sometimes, a lot would come up as I was sort of reliving some of these experiences.
And still does, right? Like, even just retelling the TV story kind of like brought a lot of emotions up.
But in a healing way, right? It's just like just peeling away, shedding the skin, letting the dust settle into the clear water so that I can see all the way through. And I just feel really proud.
Yeah.
I'm really proud.
I'm genuinely happy for you.
Thank you.
I really am. And it's a beautiful book.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm glad that you shared it with me.
Well, coming from you, that's like a huge compliment, because I just love you and admire you, and love you a lot.
You, Rebecca.
Thank you.
All right. I think that was beautiful, and I want to say thank you.
Oh, thanks, Rex. Yeah.
You Know Me Now is produced, written, and edited by Tomas Bernatsky and me, Rex Holbein. We would like to give a heartfelt thanks to Rebecca for taking the time to speak with us. You Know Me Now has a Facebook and Instagram page where you can join in on the conversation. We also have a website at www.youknowmenow.com where you can see photos of Rebecca as well as read other stories of folks we feel you should get to know. Thanks as always for listening.